Hello, everybody. Once again, I'm Lee McCrafton Jr., aka Zorval Chan Less Than Guru. Right here, we got Mars Video Cat, who's been a little stinker. Yesterday, I went to do this video, recorded it, and at the end, he had been playing with the keyboard and he turned off the recording partway through. So I did a lot of recording. And even though I could have stitched them together, it was a bit longer than I wanted. One of my goals is to try. Whether or not that's successful, probably not, but I want to try to make these not so long. Just try to give the vital information, etc. So, today, part of the Palladium rewrite series that I've been doing, we have got to the mystical aspects. I will do kind of an umbrella generalization of certain changes that I've done and things that I've kept. And then for this video, I will then do specifics about elemental magic and spell magic. I'll do them in the other order. Spell magic first, and then elemental magic. I will leave other type of mystical abilities for the future because they will just add on to that. So, having said that, mystical. I call it mystical powers. They can be spells, abilities, psychic. Doesn't matter if you're getting your spells via prayers from a deity or if you're an academic and are learning through study. It's all considered mystical. I use this term mystical in most of the games I play. It's one of the very first things I've kind of, if you want to say, conditioned my group, or I've done it enough that my group understands what mystical means and why do I use this term. It's basically because a lot of games out there will have multiple types of things where you get powers to produce effects that are supernatural. They're not normal type things. And many of them will break them up into three categories: magic, psionics or psychic abilities, and divine abilities, which things like D&D and Palladium call spells. Other games like Torg will call them miracles, or they might be called invocation, or whatever they are. They're coming from a higher power. So I always see it as magic as an outside force in the universe, in the world, that academics can study and manipulate, or maybe they can do it on their own, but they produce that effect. It's from without, not from within. Psychics or psionic abilities come from within, and that's why I have magic points versus ISP. I did keep ISP just pretty much exactly the same. If you look at my occupations video, you'll see that I kept those the same for the character classes that used ISP, and I use it for those who gain things naturally, the inner strength points. And then the third aspect is the divine, the calling from some higher power, and that's where you get your magic, whether it's a deity or an elemental lord or a devil lord, for, say, the beloved or the witches in Palladium terminology. Those are, you're getting the power from something higher. You're not studying and learning it like magic. I keep these three separate, but in the umbrella term, I use mystical for the simple fact that a lot of games out there will say X can only be affected by magic. And then the immediate response by any cleric, if they do have that definite, these are not magic, they are prayers or invocation, divine magic, or do psychic abilities, psionic abilities affect them? And sometimes there might be a little clause somewhere that says, yes, anything that says needs to be affected by magic can also be affected by divine and psychic things as well. But a lot of times it's unclear. So I wanted to have that very clear distinction. So if I have a spell effect that, say, puts up a shield around you, that you can only be affected, or maybe you're not affected by. If I say mystic, I mean all three of these things. And if I say magic, I mean only magic. It either only protects you against magic, or only protects you against psychic, or only protects you against divine. So that's my general category of mystical. and then my 3 subcategories and why I do that. So, spell magic and symbology I consider academics. Symbology is circles and wards, and that is things that you need to study. Elemental magic is from, excuse me, from the elemental lords. That's a higher magic, but certain elemental magics can be known by wizards. And in the main Palladium first edition book, they have a spell list, and at the bottom of each level, they give what they call elemental spells, spells that mimic what an elemental spell is. And I will go into further depth on a couple of changes I made in layout because of that. Then we have divine magic, which are prayers that give you a spell casting type thing, prayer invocation. I just like the idea of invoking prayers to your deity instead of calling it the exact same thing, but it pretty much means the exact same thing, and I use magic points for both of those. And then intuitive power, that is your healers using ISP, which is their internal body physical condition that they can manipulate to help others. Mind mages, adepts, even though they can cast spells, they will use ISP because they cast the spells using their inner ISP, inner strength points. And illusionists, those type of things, are going to use that intuitive power. Okay, let's move along. So, spellbooks, tomes, and grimoires. I like the idea of D&D where you fight a foe who's a spellcaster or wizard, and he might have a spell book that you can learn spells from. I like having that additional means to allow the player to learn spells. In Palladium, they don't have spell books, and the reasoning is off of old school D&D, you had to memorize a spell, and if you cast it, you forgot it. And if you wanted to cast, say, Fireball 3 times in the day and you had those 3 available spell slots, you had to memorize 3 Fireballs. And you would cast one and you would forget it. It's not like 5th edition where you have certain ones kind of memorized and then you can use your spell slots for any of those that you have memorized. It is you memorize this, and if you want to do it twice, you memorize it twice. Palladium goes off on a, if you read it in here, I'm not going to read it, but basically they don't like the idea of wizards forgetting spells. I kind of agree with that, but I do like the idea of spell books just to keep it fresh in your mind. If you don't use something, you will forget it. Having degrees in ancient languages of Latin and Greek, I know that I haven't used it every day for decades, and I am very rusty. I could probably figure it out and get back to that competency level, but it would take time, and having a book would help me immensely. So I like that idea of the spell books not necessarily having everything needed for the spell, but maybe it's some notes, some shortcuts, some things, and you might write it in a different language or use the encrypt spell to cipher it into something that other people can't see, but then they might be able to use a decipher spell to undo it. But I just like the idea of being an academic. You could look at somebody else's notes, and it might not have the exact way to perfectly cast the spell, but there's enough in there that you can figure it out. And I use the same scroll conversion percentage for that. It is completely different than scroll conversion. It's kind of the opposite. Scroll conversion, you read it, you watch the magical pattern kind of go around, and you try to figure it out. And you have kind of like a one-shot time to do it. Spellbooks don't have the magic bound in them, but they're shortcuts, so you can use it over and over. You can use my taking extra time, but then it's 15 minutes. I make a 15 minutes for the base per level of the spell. So if you just quickly want to learn a spell from a spell book and roll against your scroll conversion, you need at least 15 minutes. If you want a second level spell, that's going to be 30 minutes. And if you want the maximum bonus, it's going to be an hour and 15 minutes per level of the spell. So higher level spells, when you're looking at how many hours in a day do I have can take days. And then if you fail, you start it all over. But it's not like the scroll where the scroll vanishes, disappears, crumbles into dust or burst of light or whatnot, but it is not able to be used before. You can keep looking over the notes. But it's just going to take time. So that's why I have spell books, tomes, and grimoires. It's a nice way that I can add stuff that I kind of am like, hey, here's some spells for the wizard characters, the academic aspects, because they are not getting new spells per level. All the other spellcasters will gain something per level except for the wizard. So because of that, they do have the potential of gaining every single spell out there, but they're not going to gain it unless you, as a game master, put it in there, or they're doing the magic cauldron and rolling randomly and perhaps getting insanities. So that is about spells, books, tomes, grimoires, all kind of different names for the same thing. Then we have magic points and inner strength points. Inner strength points, again, are the intuitive classes that their mystical abilities come from within. Magic comes from without, whether that's out in the world or from your higher power. Those use magic points. I use a magic point system instead of a PPE system, and I will explain why. Having done before a Palladium first edition with second edition PPE tacked onto this, it does work. I will not try to say it doesn't work. I use it. I used it successfully. It is a common hack, if you would. Life hack or Palladium hack. A lot of people like first edition and not second edition, but they like the PPE. They don't like that their wizard only casts 2 spells at first level and then they can't do anything. And even though my purpose, one of the main purposes of the game, is that old school feel, I don't want the useless feel that a lot of people had of being the wizard. They'll do something really cool and then they have to kind of sit out or hide or hire a hireling and then control the hireling, and then you're not really playing your character, etc. There's a lot of pros and cons. I'm not saying it's completely bad. I'm just saying it's not something that I wanted in my game. So before we actually started playing, that was my solution. I did it in the past. It worked. You just look at Wizard in second edition. You see what PPE they start off with. Each of the spells in there has a PPE cost. If I made or some spells didn't exactly translate, I'd come up with a PPE cost for it. And that was basically what I was going to do. And then I realized something that I had used 20 years ago or more that I didn't want in the game. And that's because PPE works really well for Palladium Fantasy. It works well for Rifts. It works well for Beyond the Supernatural because they have ley lines and ley line nexuses and other types of ways to gain extra PPE to be able to fuel their spells. The mage, a lot of times, and when I say mage, it just means somebody who uses PPE or magic points. When the mage goes to cast certain spells, they might, at higher levels, cost hundreds and even thousands of PPE, and they might not have that PPE available. So, in Palladium games, you go to a ley line, and near a ley line, you can siphon off some magical energy, and a nexus is where multiple ley lines cross, and you can get even more. And then if you have certain heavenly celestial type events, planets aligning, solstices, equinoxes, eclipses, you might be able to gain more PPE there. And then they have the whole thing of at death, a person's PPE is doubled at that moment. So if you do a ritual sacrifice, then you can use that PPE to gain your spell as well. That's all fine and good for those games, but I did not want to have to worry about ley lines, and I didn't want my players to have to worry about ley lines. I just didn't want them in my game. They don't fit the concept of the world that we were playing in. Previously, when I used that, it was a different world, not based off of my normal world. It was actually based off of a book series, but I won't get into that. I'll just say that I put items in the game that were kind of batteries. So you'd have smaller batteries that might have tens or hundreds of PPE in them, and then the other ones up to thousands, and you could use those, and then the batteries would recharge after a while. And that worked. But in this game, I didn't want that type of thing. I wanted people to be able to just use their own magic to power spells. So the more I looked at it, the more I realized PP was not going to work for what I wanted a magic point system to be. So I came up with what I originally thought would be a bandage. This will work until I figure out something new. And then it worked so well, now it's just what I use, and I don't want to come up with something else because it is very simple, it's very easy to understand, and it works. So ISP is different. ISP is straight like it was in Palladium. Psychic abilities use kind of a set number of ISP cost, but I needed a thing that would give me around the same points, not perfect equivalent, but a general sameness between the amounts of magic points, because sometimes magic points might fuel what others would use ISP for, and ISP might be used to use what magic. So what I came up with is a base starting magic point pool of 30, and then you add double your MA. I use MA, mental affinity, because it is your confidence. It is your not just a, oh, I'm charismatic, but it also is a, how much confidence do you have. Bad side of that is why people who steal from others and through trickery are called con artists, confidence artists, confidence men, con artists. You have to have confidence to be able to cast magic. That's one of the principles of Palladium magic, is you must absolutely believe in it and yourself to be able to do it. So instead of doing MA or ME, mental endurance or intelligence, I decided MA. I understand other people might disagree and use other thing, that's fine, but for my game, that's what I wanted. So the lowest species dice for MA is 2. So 2 times MA add to that 30. So the very lowest amount of magic points, if somebody rolled really horrible but still wanted to be a person who had magic points, would start off with about 34 magic points. And then how do they use those magic points? I like the idea of mages being able to cast spells at different levels. So if you're first level, you can only cast it at first level, but if you're second level, maybe you don't need the extra duration or the extra damage or the extra this or that, and you just want to cast a simpler version. So I allow my my players to have their characters casted at a lower level. So they get a level 2 spell, maybe they'll cast it at level 1. Or maybe if they have a level 10 spell, they only want to cast it at level 5. So I made sure most spells in Palladium do have a per level of the caster, but it doesn't ever say that you can downgrade. A lot of people would allow it. I would allow it. But it just says like 1d6 per level of the caster. It's not 1d6 per level of the spell that was cast. So that's one of my differentiations, is that it's per level of the spell cast. So that 5th level spell, your 5th level, you can cast it at 1st level if you want. So that is half of the magic point requirement. The other half is the level of the spell. So a couple of examples. 1st level spell, I'm 1st level. I can only cast it at 1st level. 1st level spell, 1st level that I cast it at, is going to cost 2 magic points. Now let's go to level 2. I have a 2nd level spell. I'm at level 2. I can cast it up to my level. So at level 2, I could cast that level 2 spell at 2nd level. That's going to cost 4 points. I still have a 1st level spell. I could cast that spell at level 2, and that's going to cost 3 points. Conversely, I could take that level 2 spell and cast it at 1st level spell, and that's only going to cost 3 points. Now, yes, you will get more bang for your buck by casting it at the max level, but after a time, you are going to be using through magic points. You're going to be using it, and they're going to come back slowly. They will come back, but they're going to come back slowly. So maybe you've spent a lot and you can't cast that 5th level fireball that you really want. So you're going to cast a 1st level. Or you have a globe of daylight and you don't need it for a long time. So I'm going to cast it at a lower level. Yes, it's not as much. It's more magic. I'm not doing a better ratio, but I'm just overall spending less magic points, and that has worked really well. That I've found in my games, and you can watch it when I ask people what level did you cast that spell at. Sometimes they'll cast it at full, sometimes they'll cast it at a lower because they either don't feel that a higher level is necessary or they don't want to use the magic points for it. It's just something that I put in it for a reason, and then that the design actually is just really cool. It's one of my two favorite things that I have redone in my rewrite. The other one being the way that I have armor SDC work, but that's how casting spells works. Um, Gaining abilities again, straight from here. For wizards, you can learn off of scrolls and scroll conversions. I explained how I do that with spell books as well. Mentors, you can pay or trade spells with somebody else out there who does it academically. So you wouldn't be able to trade spells with a priest because they just pray to their deity and get that spell effect. But other wizards, they can do that with. Granting spell knowledge. Now, priests do have an ability, and I kept that ability, is their deity will allow them to teach a spell to a wizard, and I do allow that. And then the Enchanted Cauldron spell, which is a fun, crazy, random way to learn spells that's kind of a little dark also. So won't go through very details on that. Clergy spell knowledge, I kind of kept the premise in the main book here that different deities allow their priests and other clergy to be able to cast certain spells. I did do a couple of changes for that though. If you look here, my deities are different, but I did like the idea of some deities having psychic abilities, some deities having circles and wards, and some deities having elemental magic. Now, one of the things in here is that it specifically says spells, and it might even say spell magic. Hopefully, it won't take me too long to find the priest and find out. So I know that I'm not saying something that I think, but that things have got crossed in my mind. So if we look at gaining spells, choosing and gaining spells, it says consequently, okay, we'll just say the first level priest can only choose one spell from any of the first level spell magic, and that is bolded spell magic as listed under magic and wizard. Sorry. So what that means is technically by the book, you can't learn elemental spells. So there's deities in here that only have elemental spells. And while you can always say, oh, theoretically people might just align with that deity and then there's a bunch of other priest abilities, but you really are kind of hurting a lot of potential if you choose a deity that only has psychic abilities, who only has elemental spell abilities, who only has circles or wards, etc. And a lot of game masters have slightly altered that and allowed any spells. A lot of deities do have elemental spells, and they say, okay, you can take if your deity is knows air and water spells 1 through 7th level, then you can choose any air or water spells too. That's something that I allowed. But I also like the idea of if there's psychic abilities out there, there's some deities that only have psychic abilities. And I'm talking about the main book, not my own. Yes, I could have made it so that my deities only have spell magic. And then that would have made it so that any of the players could choose it. But I started thinking, I kind of like the idea of the deities knowing different things and allowing their clergy to do those different things. And that might be a psychic power. Here, it didn't quite make sense because ISP was different than spells per day. But adding magic points that is roughly equivalent to an ISP, it makes it so that you can. And if a deity has both psychic abilities and spells, you can choose from both of those. I also then decided, hey, if they know circles and they gain a level, they could learn a circle or a ward. Yes, they wouldn't know everything like in first edition like a Diabolist or a Summoner would, but in my game, the Symbologist, they gain like one per level, and then they can learn more. Well, the priest couldn't learn more, but they could learn that, and maybe they just extra options. So I kind of gave that to my deities. So like here we look at Zar, the war god, and he can do all spell magic, wards, and circles of protection. And then I specify what clergy he allows. He allows clerics and paladins. He doesn't allow priests because clerics and paladins are more martial. But then Jas, Trickster God, spell magic level 1, all wards and psychic powers level 1 through 8. So if you like the idea of having priestly abilities, but you wanted psychic things instead of spells, that would be a viable choice. And I just kind of do that. And if I did play Palladium with the Palladium setting and the Palladium deities, I probably would do that as well. I don't see any super powerful reason not to do that once I have my magic point system in place. I understand that it didn't quite do that before, but then elemental magic would have been normal. I don't see where that would have been very unbalanced. Double Lords, I only have Double Lords. I changed them all. They're not the same ones as in here. I don't have Demon Lords because in my setting, demons are devils are fallen angels. Every single one of a devil is a fallen angel, but all the demons are kind of like the animals and monsters of hell. So that is where I have the differentiation between the two. And elemental lords are basically the same. These super powerful elementals that you can gain power from. In my game, they're servitors. In original, they are called warlocks. Okay, so then we go to spell magic. So I explained how casting spells works. So second level spell, you cast it at first level. It's going to cost you 3 magic points, and then you gain 2 back an hour. I did that the exact same way as ISP is gained, and you don't have to sit around or do anything. ISP have a psychic ability that is meditation that they can gain back more, but if they just walk around, they're going to gain 2 ISP, and they're going to, if they have magic points, they'll gain 2 magic points. So basically, if I say, okay, everybody sleeps through the night, and you wake up, and I determine that they've slept, say, 6 hours, let's say, okay, everybody gains 12 magic points and ISP back. So it just makes it really easy, and you don't have to worry about the spells per day. And here, specify 24-hour period, and the way that that reads to me means you would be, I know there's a lot of things. Okay, is it when I go to sleep and I wake up? Is it at sunrise? Is it sunset? Is it at midnight? Clock strikes midnight, boom, I have all my spells back. But the way it says in the book is it says 24-hour period. So if I cast a spell at 1:11 p.m., then I shouldn't get that spell slot back until 1:11 p.m. the next day. And then if I cast my second spell at 6:30 p.m., I shouldn't get the next one back until 6:30 p.m. And by the time you're, say, 5th or so level and you have 10 or so, let's say whatever level it is that you have around 10 spells, that's a lot of bookkeeping, or a lot of, hey, I just want to go to sleep, or waiting until midnight type thing. And I like the idea of you just get back. It doesn't matter if you're sleeping or not sleeping, so you might as well do some stuff out there, especially if you have a time limit going. So that's how I gain stuff back. As players advance in levels, they will gain that 2 will become 3, and then 4, and it might get up to 5, just because I don't want higher level mages just sitting around or walking around waiting for that to come back. It's kind of the same reason why I talked in the previous that I redid healing with the heal base and that. So we talked about the spell levels, edge of area of effects. This is mainly for a map-based combat. I used to do grids. I don't like grids, but I still do maps. I just allow them not to have to be in the center of a square. They can go anywhere as long as they have the distance to go there. And if you watch any of my previous close videos, not ones at the beginning, those were grids, but any of my more recent is the word that I was looking for. Any of my more recent videos, you'll see that I don't use grids. Sometimes the maps I get will have grids built into them, but I don't care about it. I always choose grid lists when I'm making a map. But whenever you do theater of the mind, it's very easy for a game master to, somebody say, hey, I cast this, it's an area of effect spell, 10-foot radius, and the game master says, well, if you do that, you're going to get your, Cassius there is fighting the orc, so you're going to get Cassius in it as well. So then you either don't do it, or the game master is he's going to cast it. Okay, he gets Cassius as well. Theater of the mind, you can kind of do that. When you actually have a battle map, though, players will pinpoint area of effects. If they have to move to get a clear line of sight to that place, they will measure out that area and they'll make that edge of the spell affect the opponent but not affect the ally. And it's a little cheesy because it's not like your mages have laser ruler eyes and can measure distance and know exactly where to go. Plus, you're not just static, you're moving around. It might not be showing that on the map, but your characters are moving around. So, to make it perfectly clear, this is not for anybody that is solidly within an area of effect. If they're within the area of effect, if they get a saving throw, then they get a saving throw, and if they fail it, then the spell fully affects them, etc. Just like any other area of effect. I'm talking about the edges where the player is trying to cut that edge and put his opponent on one side and his ally on the other side. So when they get to the edges, I basically just have the wizard kind of roll a 2-strike. They roll a bonus or a d20 and they add any targeting bonuses that they get. They want to roll high, just like a archer shooting an arrow wants to roll high. And then the opponent at that edge gets a free dodge. It's not exactly an dodge, but it uses dodge bonuses. It doesn't cost an action. They don't need auto dodge. It's just a where were they at the time. They see this spell effect kind of coming out or going. Maybe they'll, at the edge, be able to get away. If they dodge this effect, then they are not in the effect. And if I need to, I can move it on the map. The same number is used for the ally, but the ally gets to subtract the bonus that they have to dodge. So they're trying to get under. So the higher the person, the spellcaster rolls, say they roll a 14, then their ally has to roll, they roll a d20, they subtract their dodge bonus, and they want to get under the 14. Maybe they've moved in it at the same time. So it's just one of those little kind of random type things with some skill or natural ability for dodging that gets involved in the mage as they go higher levels. They will, if they have targeting, then they can be on target better and make it harder for the opponents to get at the edge to get out of the effect, and easier for their allies to be out of the effect. So it's just something that I added because there was a lot of that, because I'm on a battle map of here's the radius, okay, here's where the line cuts off the ally with the opponent. And I didn't want to just say no if your opponent's there next to the ally is always going to be in it, or the opponent's never going to be in it. So that's why I came up with the edge of area of effect spells. Along with that, canceling spells. There's not really a good thing in Palladium that really discusses how you cancel it, except for you can cancel it. And I don't like that idea because I cast fly on somebody and they fly, and then all of a sudden I cancel it and they fall. Or a levitate. I cast levitate on somebody and I'm the one moving them up and slamming them into the ceiling. If you watch one of the very first adventures, you'll see that that happens. So I decided to use Palladium's aura system. Palladium, your aura is kind of your part of you. If you cast a spell on yourself, then it is part of your aura, it is part of you, and therefore you can cancel it as well. Just you want to cancel it, you cancel it. It doesn't cost an action or anything, doesn't cost any magic points. if I cast it out in the environment on an object or a wall out there, then it's not no longer part of my aura. So I touch it and I spend, since it's my spell, I spend the same amount of magic points that I used to cast it, and then that can cancel it. Um, for those times that you want to cast. Maybe I threw up a wall of fire and now we need to go that way because of whatever happens. We need that fire wall to go away. So I touch it, I might burn myself, but I spend the magic points and it goes, and then we can go through it. If I cast it on somebody else, it is part of their aura, it is part of them. I no longer can affect it by just cancelization. I can maybe use the negate magic or dispel magic barrier, whatever those anti-magic type spells are. I could use that normally, but just canceling it, I cannot do that. That's why I do canceling spells that way. Self on an item or a place and on others. And then I have a psychic spell layout. Basically, the point of this, and to explain what everything is because in Palladium they have a couple of different layouts for. I want to say, and I could have this reversed because I don't want to spend the time looking at it right now. Um, they will have like the name, the range, the duration, and then the description, and then the saving throw. I think that's how psychic abilities work, um, with ISP in there. But on spells, I think it has um, the name, the range, the duration, the saving throw, and then the description. So just to keep things the same, I just have kind of a general overall layout and for consistency. So that's all that is. My spell list. Spell list is pretty much what it is in this book here. A couple of differences. One is I went through Palladium Second Edition. I went through Rifts, and there were spells in there that I really thought I liked and wanted to include in my rewrite. I slipped them in there. They're Megaversal spells or Palladium spells. They work. An example of one that I really like is Life Source. Level 3 spell. Life Source is a spell that allows you to use your hit points, and this is and came from Rifts to instead of PPE and Rifts. So I have it that you can spend your hit points and you can convert it into magic points. It's something that I've always allowed in my own game of Dunamis because elves in my game, that is how they fuel magic instead of using magic points. Or I had astral points in my game and it was life points instead of hit points. But it's the same concept. And I liked being able to take that spell, give it to all elves, allow others to use it if they wanted to, because that was another thing. Elves just got to do it more efficiently in my previous games, but I wanted to have that in there. I put this spell, and now I don't have to come up with another system. I just include the spell, and it works. Also, things from other games that I liked were gestureless casting and silent casting, so I added those as spells. And I also opened it up to my players. I said, okay, what is something that you think you don't see it in the book and you think would be something that would be in a high fantasy world? Now, not don't give me something like another spell that does damage. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about some type of utility spell that you really think would be useful, and that it would make sense in a fantasy world. One of my players came up with Dehydrate, and you look up here under level 1, you'll see I have a Dehydrate spell. Basically, takes water out of things, whether it is I got my clothes wet and I want them dry, Dehydrate, boom. I got some meat here and I want it to last longer, Dehydrate, and now I got something similar to a jerky. It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense if I think about it as some type of an air spell, a water spell, and a spell magic version. So that's where I kind of sprinkled them around. Was okay. Here they are. Um, and then one of the other things I did was the spells of legend. I actually had to give them levels. So I have level 12 or 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15th level spells. That is basically because I need to know what level spells are for how many magic points. So that level 15th spell if you cast it at level 15 is going to be 30 points. And if you remember, the lowest a starting character can have is 34. If they roll the 1 every time they gain a level, because it's a 1d6 magic points per level, they would get, let's say 14, because they don't get it at level 1. 14 plus 34 is what, 48? So with 48 points, you're going to be able to cast that 15th level spell once at 15th level, and then you could cast it again at a lower level. So it is one that your magic points are going to allow you to cast a lot of small spells or a few big spells, but anybody who is a caster that would happen to get a level 15th spell is going to at least be able to cast it once. So that is something that was intentional, and it worked out really well. And again, I'm very happy with the system. The two other types of changes that I did with spell magic is, one is sometimes I just changed what level a spell was. This came about when I was looking and had a player question tongues versus fairies tongues. In Palladium, tongues is a second level spell and fairies tongue is a third level spell. Fairies tongues allows you to speak and understand fairies. Tongues allows you to speak and understand any language. It doesn't say not fairies, so I'm assuming fairies is a language that can be spoken and understood. So why is it a level 3 spell? Why is it a level 2 spell and fairy's tongue, which is much more specific, a level 2 spell? So what I did is I flipped them. I made fairy's tongue level 2 and tongues level 3. My players, even though they could have access to either of them, that made sense to them. The other thing that I did was specifically for spells that a lower level spell did much better than a higher level spell, and because this is not the first time I've attempted this video, I specifically know of an example that I can give. If we go past the spell magic and get into the elemental spells, so go up a little bit. Fire, earth, air. Where is it? Okay, here. So if you look at air spells, you see that there is a cloud of steam. Cloud of steam is a 90-foot range. It lasts 4 rounds per level, and the dimensions are 30 by 30 by 30, a cube, and it does 1d8 points of damage. It blinds a target for, I believe, 1d6 rounds. And if they save, then they take half damage, so they still take some damage, and they're blinded for 1 to 3 rounds. And the blindness is a -7 strike, parry, and dodge. Okay, which is different than what other things are strike, parry, and dodge when you're blind. But that's a pretty potent spell, and my player Warlock Servitor has used that very effectively. If we look at level 2, there is a Miasma spell. Miasma is 60-foot range, so a second level spell that is 30 feet shorter. It is a 10-foot radius, so that would be a 20-foot circumference. And so the other one is a 30 by 30 by 30, so the cloud of steam is a larger volume. Miasma also does a d4 damage per round. It also lasts 4 rounds per melee, and the penalty is a -3 strike, parry, and dodge. And a save, you just save, and it doesn't affect you at all. So when I'm looking at that, I'm like, this Miasma spell is much, much less potent in every single way as the cloud of steam. If I'm a air caster, I'm going to get cloud of steam, and even if I don't get it at second level, and I get to second level, and I'm looking at my second level spells, and I'm like, oh, miasma. No, I'm going to pick cloud of steam, or I'll pick something else like globe of silence or levitate. I'm not going to, for any reason, ever pick miasma because the level 1 spell is better in pretty much every way except for being equal in the duration. So, did I flip the spells? That would have been something I could have did, but I was looking at spells like that, like miasma, and then if we look over at fire, and we have cloud of smoke, and there, let's see what other ones might be out there, cloud of ash, things like that. They kind of get in your lungs, and that's kind of where the damage and stuff comes from. So I decided to do a different type of change. Instead of changing the level, I just made it so that the save was not a save versus magic, it was a save versus fumes. Save versus fumes is extremely rarely used. There are a small little list in the alchemist section in here that are fumes, and that's what you would use to save versus, but otherwise there's no use of that entire mechanism. So those spells I use save versus fumes. Save versus fumes is a 14. Save versus magic is a 12. And what I also do to kind of make it a little more, because still the effect's not as powerful, I allow the mage to add their spell strength to it. So they might have a spell strength 1, 2, or 3. That's going to up that 14 to a 15, 16, or 17. And it's going to be a lot more difficult for somebody to resist it, because even though I allow the spell strength to boost it up, I don't allow the save versus spell bonuses to add to the roll to save versus it. So somebody who's a mage might have a +2, +3. Starting off, a lot of them have +1 to save versus spell magic, so they're really rolling an 11 or higher instead of a 12 or higher. They're not going to get that bonus to that 14. They would specifically need a save versus fumes. So it just makes it harder. Even at the base, a base of 12 versus a base of 14 is a 10% bonus. It's not a huge amount, but as you add the spell strength onto it, and there's a lot of other spells that give you bonuses to save versus spells, not allowing that to go against save versus fumes makes those weaker spells that are higher level, actually there's a reason to choose them because they have a different saving throw. So that was the one thing that I did there. Another example is, let's just go to a level 3 spell. If we look at Fireball here, one of the things that I did was, instead of having in here the Fireball is no saving throw, and you can dodge, not parry, rolling an 18, or it says rolling 18 or higher, but it doesn't say does that include bonuses or does it have to be natural. And either way, there is a potential problem if you view it like I view it. If I look at it as a bonus, I'm seeing that, okay, then the opponent, a lower level opponent, is going to have a harder time to dodge it than a higher level opponent. And that makes sense. Lower level opponent's going to have less bonuses to dodge. The higher is going to get it. And if they get to add their bonuses, then it's going to be easier to reach that 18 or higher. The downside is the caster, doesn't matter if the caster is first level or 15th level, it's still an 18 to dodge versus it. Okay, so if we flip it and we take it away, it's still going to be a first level caster and a second level or 15th level caster, same 18, but now the opponent, it doesn't matter if they're first level or 15th level or what bonuses they have to dodge, it's still just going to be they need to roll an 18, 19, or 20 on the die. So what I've decided to do is, again, with that allowing the players to determine what level of spell they cast it at, they get a +1 to strike. They're going to roll a d20. It's not going to be a flat 18 number. They're going to roll a d20, but they're going to add a bonus of 1 per level. So if they're at 3rd level, they get the Fireball spell, but they only cast it at 1st level, it's a +1 to. They're going to roll a d20 and add 1 to it. If they happen to have targeting, they can add targeting as well. So at 15th level, it will be pretty nice. A +15 plus any targeting that you have, very easily it's going to be in the 20s to be able to dodge. but a higher level opponent is going to have some dodging. Maybe they'll have some spell effects. There's a lot of spell effects that add a bonus to dodge. So you kind of give that give and take. I like that idea, so I added that there, and I also like the idea of a shield being able to block it. Not a sword parry, but a shield getting behind it and block it. So dodge, you can dodge it. You can't parry it unless it's with a shield. And basically, I did that with all the spells that had either a you can only dodge versus it, or sometimes they had like a +5 or +6. So you'd roll, you'd shoot out ice, and it was like either a 5 or 6. Ball lightning was similar. Um, Instead of just giving that flat bonus, I give it a +1 versus strike, adding targeting. So at lower level, you're not going to be as accurate. At higher level, you're going to be more accurate. And then again, the opponent who's dodging against it, as they gain level, they're going to get higher bonuses to dodge. They'll have access to higher spells and more spells and magic items that might give them bonuses to dodge. So that was one of the tweaks I did. Is so far it's worked pretty good. So I guess the very last thing that I can think that I wanted to add was elemental spells that are also spell magic. And basically, what it meant is that if you look at my magic list here, you look, let's see, this way. It's hard for me. If you look here, you'll notice that there is not a separate category for elemental spells. In the main book here, you'll see like here down, these are elemental spells, and then they give you a page to look at. So if you look at level 3 fireball, you have to go down here, and then you see that fireball is on page 93. Now, here's where I've encountered problems, both as a game master when I'm telling people what to do and when I was playing. Is you see this and you go to that page, and as an example, let me do. Um, let's do. Oh, Circle of Flame. Circle of Flame, third level spell. As a spell magic spell, it says page 93. So if I go to page 93, I see Circle Flame, 60 feet, 10 melees per level, saving throw is none, and then 30 feet circumference, 30 feet high, 5 foot thick walls. Anyone that goes through it is 4 to 32 points of damage. So that'd be like 4d8. Okay, so the thing is if I actually look at the level 3 spells under spell magic, so if I'm in the spell magic section, there is a place where it says elemental spells. And they're basically, they give the name and the range, duration, saving throw, but they don't give the description. So if I look here at Circle of Flame, it's third level, range is a 10-foot radius. That is different than on page 93, where it says that it is a, when I say 30-foot radius, Circle of Flame, 60 feet. So right there, the fire spell, elemental spell, says 60 feet away, and then it's a 30 feet in circumference, so 16-foot radius, or sorry, 15-foot radius. Here, the terminology is completely different, 10-foot radius, so that would be 20 feet across. So you're losing 10 feet, and it only lasts 5 melees instead of 10 melees per warlock. And it doesn't even say how far away. Here it says it's 60 feet. So you would have to not just go to the page that it told you to go to, you would have to cross reference page 65, where they give the elementals, the spell magic for elemental spell descriptions. specifically, and then you to find the effect and other things you would have to go to the other book or the other page. Sorry. Instead of having all of that flip flopping back and forth, I just put it in the spell list. We look up here, if you look at sorry, if you look up here, three three columns over, level 3. I just have Circle of Flame there, and that's where you would go. You would go to the spell magic description of it, and that is where you would find how it affects spell magic for wizards and priests that have access to spell magic and not access to elemental magic. If they have access to elemental magic, then they would use the elemental list. I do like the idea of it being a little different. There were a couple that I found where the spell magic version was a little more powerful, whether that's with duration or with range or something like that. But for the most part, the elemental spells are more powerful than their spell magic version. I like the idea of there being a difference. It gives more reason, or it gives a little reason that you would choose something that had the elemental version of the spell instead of choosing the wizard always. I like viable choices. I don't think everything should always be equal, but I do think there should be some give and take. How that's balanced doesn't have to be a perfect balance. It can be a thematical balance instead of an exact balance. So that is kind of all the different things that I have rewritten about spells for the Palladium, how I do magic points, why I do magic points instead of PPE, canceling spells, edge of area of effects, some spells that I added from both just making it because I felt that they were needed or adding them from other Palladium books, switching switching the levels. For one, there were two spells, but a higher level spell did less than a lower spell, or changing saving throws for those fume gases type spells that had much lower effects but were much higher level. The other thing that kind of goes along with that is Death. Death is a 10th level spell, and it is 1d6 points of damage. That is just a 10th level spell that does the exact same thing as a Call Lightning or Fireball, 1d6 per level damage. That is either Call Lightning originally is not able to be dodged, and the dodge for Fireball is an 18. The save versus spell magic is a 12 plus whatever your spell strength is. So even at a full spell strength of +3, the death spell is going to be able to be saved at a 15 or higher. The Fireball is going to be saved, if you remember originally, at only 18 or higher. So there's what does the death spell? Why is that a 10th level spell? And that was one of the reasons where I split off shock points from hit points. Shock points are that d6 that you gain every level. Some of the more martial classes get a bonus to that, but you bypass that and you go straight to hit points. And in my system, any hit point damage makes you wounded, which then you have like -2 to your strike, parry, and dodges, and I think then it's a -10 to your skill percentages because you're hurt. And I did want there to be a difference between I'm at full health and at 1 health. So I didn't want to get nitpicky, but I did want something there. So I have it that if you take any hit point damage at all, even if you have full shock points, that you are wounded. And this spell allows me to do that, the death spell. Anything with death. Death blow for assassins, death spell, death ward, death circle, evil eye death, all of those things bypass the shock points and make it so that it's very, very likely that you kill somebody, and even if you don't, even if you rolled horribly, you've wounded them if they fail to save. That is how I get a level 10th spell that is, even though it does the same damage of a 1d6 per level, is a 10th level spell in comparison of a 3rd level spell that does 1d6 points per level. So again, here's just my my list showing all the spells, and then my elemental spells. We won't get into any of these. I basically kind of explained the differences. I made sure every spell had something per level, so there's a reason to cast it at different levels. And then next time we will get into symbology, which is circles and wards. So having said that, hopefully you have gained some insight into both the original Palladium, how I did my rewrite, why I did certain things, and it gives you something to think about if you are doing Palladium or interested in Palladium and you want to know some of the hiccups or potential problems. Again, I know that people play this game fine and they don't need to do a whole rewrite or anything, but other people get into the really into it and start either seeing potential problems or having potential problems pointed out to them by players and need to make rulings. So I'm telling you kind of how I did certain things like that so you can see what I did, see why I did it, and determine if it will work for you or not. So once again, having said that, I'm Liam Crafton Jr., aka Zorval Chan, Less Than Guru, and until next time, I will catch you later.